Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade. This is the Education Show, and I'm delighted to be here today with Steve Waldman with Rebuilding Local News. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Let's just jump right in. What's your take on the state of journalism? Here we are at the beginning of 2026.
Well, the state of local news is bleak. There's been about a 75% drop in the number of local reporters in about 20 years. That's really an astounding collapse. And that means, yes, many communities don't have any local reporters, but even the ones that do, it's just much thinner and more superficial and less impactful than it used to be. And, if in the olden days you had a reporter who was covering education or even a reporter covering a higher ed, now have five other beats. And so their ability to go, deep on education or anything else is much lower. And so that has all sorts of implications for communities that we can talk about. I should say that out of the wreckage are growing nice green shoots. Like it is also at the same time a period of great innovation. There's a lot of wonderful new things going on. They just tend to be small and not at the scale they need to be.
Right.
But there is a tremendous amount of energy and excitement happening at the same time.
Before we talk about that, let me get a couple of things straight. Why do I care about local news? Isn't national news enough?
Oh gosh, there's so many reasons. So when you don't have local news, first of all, people in the community just don't have the information to solve their own problems. They don't know what the candidates for office stand for. They don't know what the issues are that are being faced. They don't know how decisions are being made that affect their lives and their children's lives, things like that. Uh, Beyond that, local news, all when you have less local news, you tend to have more corruption, less effective government services. There's one study that actually said municipalities that had less local news had higher borrowing costs, municipal borrowing costs, which translates literally into higher taxes and things like that. So it's actually very, concrete in the pocketbook. And then the last thing I would say, which is a little bit softer, a little harder to put, quantify, but is equally important, which is that it contributes to polarization when we don't have local news. And part of that is that we don't have common things to understand and be proud of in a community, like community identity. The other part, though, is that the vacuum that's created by the contraction of local news is filled by national news and
Right.
by social media. And those tend to be more polarizing, more misinformation, and more divisive.
Right. It's not like with food deserts, it doesn't mean that there's no food. It just means that the food is less nutritious. Is that a fair analogy?
Right. And so the information, yeah, in fact, it's a little bit of a kind of a paradox, which is like we in the industry talk about there being these shortages. If you talk to regular people, their first reaction is like, shortage? Are you kidding? I am drowning in information. There's news and information everywhere. So it doesn't feel like a shortage, but it's a shortage of particular things and an abundance of other things.
Mhm.
And the shortage is most acute around sort of verified, trustworthy local information.
And just out of curiosity, when you say there's been a drop off in local news reporters, a precipitous drop off, is that comparable to the loss of farming jobs, the loss of manufacturing jobs? How do we think about the
It's
loss of
actually one
journalism?
of the biggest drops that there is. I think I saw that it was comparable to the coal industry.
Okay.
To give you a sense of, there aren't many industries that have lost 75% of their personnel. So it on the scale of, you know, economic contractions, it's right up near the top.
You and I first met, I think I mean by email, but got to know each other. At least I got to know your name about 10 years ago when this thing came along called Report for America. My first thought when I heard that there was this thing coming called Report for America was that it was a great idea with a horrible name. It turns out to have been, from what I understand, a perfectly fine name and a perfectly big success. Tell us about the successes and challenges of Report for America.
So, Report for America, the name was somewhat built off of Teach for America, which I think in the educate if you've covered education as you have, has baggage to people who aren't in the education world. It just sort of evokes a vague sense of someone doing good thing, going into a local area and trying to help out, um, and it conveys the idea of a person
Mhm.
going somewhere and trying to do the journalism, and that really is what the program is. It places reporters into local newsrooms. Sometimes they're from that community, sometimes they're from another community, and then we pay for half the salary, and then we work with the local newsrooms to raise the rest of the money from the community. And it's really just about creating. It's about beat reporting. Schools, healthcare, criminal justice, the nitty gritty of community reporting, and getting people on the ground in the communities. And there's been, I think, over 1,000 reporters now and hundreds of thousands of articles that have happened as a result of that.
It seems like it's been a tremendous success. For a time, I felt like a Report for America was single-handedly holding up the education beat jobs numbers, and protecting education from having losses, at least for a time. Were there any particular successes or particular problems with the program or the model?
Well, oh gosh, obviously it's hard to have impact until you get to a certain scale. And once you get to a certain scale, all sorts of nice things happen. Like, to take in the case of the education reporters, like the first couple of years, we had a few education reporters. But what happened was, when you get to year 3 or 4 and you started to have, I don't remember now, but like 30 education reporters, something like that, 40 around the country, you now have a cohort of 30 or 40 education reporters. And so you can bring in people like you or other folks to do trainings. They can help each other. I mean, that's one of the things that we learned, that I wouldn't say we didn't anticipate this entirely, but I would say when you do this sort of satisfaction or feedback surveys at the end, the thing that the reporters say was most valuable was actually their interaction with other corps members. So that cohort effect of is really powerful, and especially given, as we know, that unfortunately a lot of newsrooms don't have a lot of editing. They're smaller, so there's less of a community. So you're kind of creating another community among the Report for America education reporters, and it's sort of on a emotional level, it's supportive, but it's also, they just give each other story ideas, because, as you know, like, a good local education story idea in one place very often is something you can do in another place too.
And did you end
So
up, sorry to
it really
interrupt, did you
feeds.
end up having to hire someone to coordinate or train by beat? Does such a thing still exist today?
Well, it's a good question. What we've ended up doing is the staff is organized more regionally. It was always a hard call, because you could do it by beats, you could do it regionally. We decided it was better to do it regionally, because that's literally where people are, and we wanted. But they had more virtual groups that were by topic, and mentors. They tried to assign mentors that were affiliated with that topic, and have trainings and things like that that were topic specific.
And then it seemed like Report for America from the outside seemed like it sort of topped out. I don't know whether it's that the newsrooms didn't even have uh, half the payroll to pay someone, or whether the foundations turned on a dime, as foundations sometimes do. What
It
was there
was
good
just,
luck?
yeah, no, it's sort of gone, it kind of went up and then it went down, and now it's back up again.
Okay.
And it was really a funding thing. It was nothing. No, the demand for it is, you know, off the charts still. Like, I can't remember. I'm not as involved in the day to day, so I may be a little out of date, but I think the last cycle they had like 100 openings and 1,000 applicants for core members or something on that scale. And for newsrooms, it's a similar ratio. So the appetite among journalists to do this and among newsrooms to do it is very, very high. As I'm recalling, what literally happened, and this is a great life lesson, is we had a $2 million grant from Facebook. And it was very generous and it was very important. It fielded a lot of reporters. And Facebook just decided one day they were out
Right.
of the news business, of subsidizing the news business.
Right.
We should have seen it coming, honestly. Like they kind of warned, this is never going to be, this isn't forever. But it's hard when you're getting that kind of money to not just think it's always going to be there. And then one day it wasn't. And that was kind of what led to the, that there were a couple other smaller things. But honestly, that a lot of it was that.
Right.
And so, we kind of rebuilt with a more diversified revenue stream, and it's back up to, I think, pretty close to its peak in terms of annual, slots.
Foundation. Yeah. This brings me into my next question. I had the chance to talk to Dick Toffel, the former ProPublica guy, and the gist of what he said to me, and I'm paraphrasing here, apologies to Dick, was that only fools try to make journalism work off of foundations, that high-value individuals are the way to go. And I'm curious if you have any insights or experience about foundation versus individual fundraising or other revenue strategies.
That seems to be true.
Why
Report from America is a little bit earlier in its life cycle than ProPublica is, and I think that what I always encourage people who are trying to do this is, get as many foundation grants as you can, but view it almost like seed capital.
Okay.
Like it's not always going to be there. Use it to build the entity and build also a fundraising apparatus that will eventually be able to shift to individual giving. So I think it's good advice. I would say the one thing that has happened though in the last 5 years is that foundations have actually committed more to local news. So normally I think you do see a kind of pattern. You would know better than I in terms of like the education space, but it certainly is not uncommon for foundations to become interested in a topic and then 5 years later move on to another topic. We're right now, though, in the upswing part of foundation interest in local news. Now, I don't know how long it's going to last. I keep telling everyone, like, act as if it's not going to last. But right now, it's actually, it's on the rise. And, Press Forward, you probably heard of as an effort by a bunch of big foundations to generate more from other foundations. So it's actually headed in the right direction. The main problem that I'm hearing from other folks in this world is not sort of a lack of interest in it. It's just that the federal budget cuts in everything else, from USAID to cancer research to education, has so stretched the foundation world that everything is squeezed. So it's not that they have lost interest in local news, but they're trying to backfill the elimination of USAID in their international program. And so they're moving money, this year is kind of the big stressor that I'm hearing about.
Tell me how Rebuild Local News connects to Report for America. I think I have a decent understanding of what Report for America is designed to do and has done to a certain extent. How is Rebuild similar or different? Is it just bigger?
No, it's same topic, but from a very different angle. It's about public policy. It's about passing laws to help sustain community news. Whereas Report for America was entirely a philanthropic, direct service kind of model. This is about the government, the federal and state and local governments for all of American history have had policies that helped or hurt the media to varying degrees, from the postal subsidy of 1792, which was actually an enormous subsidy that went on for like 150 years, that helped basically fuel the rise of the early newspaper industry, to all sorts of other things, requirements for TV stations, that the cable TV people had to put the local TV news show on the cable channel, and all sorts of things like that. So it's always been and part of what went into the success of or not of local news. We tend to think of this as, we're just pure, capitalist entities, and it's always been a mix. And so our view, this was started on the view of like, the policies haven't caught up to the reality. The crisis right now is in local news. The policies aren't really geared toward that. We need policies that are. So but the riddle, of course, is we're the press. And so getting money from the government, or even asking for money from the government or from taxpayers, is like inherently problematic. So you have to look for types of policies that are a little more indirect, rules of the road kinds of policies. But the goal is really born of the idea that I guess I came to believe when I was at Report for America, that we're not going to get out of this hole and get to having a community news system that we're happy with without three different things happening. One is improved business models, earned revenue, and better editorial models, better service of communities. That has to happen. Two is a greater role for philanthropy. It has to be viewed more as a public good, and philanthropy, large and small, and down to the local level, needs to look at it the same way they look at libraries and museums and hospitals and other things that are kind of a public good. And the third part of it is public support. That, I don't want it to ever be the main thing, but I don't see how we get there just in terms of the dollars and the scale without some public support. So I just decided, okay, lots of great people are working on the first two parts of that, the business model innovations and more philanthropy. No one is working on the public policy changes that are needed. So I decided to add that, sort of extra tool to the kit.
So it's research and advocacy. You're not trying to produce great journalism. You're not trying to literally rebuild local reporting through direct efforts. You're trying to create policies and advocate for state laws that would move things forward.
Exactly. Which is new to me, honestly. Like I covered politics and government for many years.
It's
but actually doing advocacy is a bit new to me, but that's what it is. And we also develop model bills, to help make it more likely.
I came from politics into journalism.
Okay.
I can only imagine what it's like going from journalism into politics. 10 or 20 years ago, a newspaper taking money from outside, anything other than advertising, was considered a problem, and people looked very hard at the Ford Foundation and other people who were giving small bits of money to increase coverage or X or Y. That practice has since grown tremendously and is, to my knowledge, not considered as much of a problem as it was 10 or 20 years ago. Foundation money into commercial legacy. There are all these ed labs all over the place that are going into legacy newspapers. Do you think that it's going to be 20 years from now? Do you think that government support of journalism is going to be similar, one of those things that we used to worry about that we don't worry about, or is it very different?
I think it will be. I hope it will be. And I think, our sense of cautiousness should also be kind of the same, right? Like what usually when you'd have the conversation about should you take money from a foundation, the conversation would usually, someone else in the room would say, well, we take money from the car dealership and they have half our revenue, and that's not a good position either. And eventually everyone says, okay, well, really what matters is that you don't become too dependent on any one funder, so that you always have to have the ability to walk away or something like that. So I think that will be the case with public support as well. But, it's important to kind of think about what kinds of public support we're talking about, because we're not talking about people like in the governor's office writing grant checks to news organizations. We strongly oppose that kind of thing. It's things like in Illinois, the program that passed last year and which is being implemented pretty successfully right now is a refundable tax credit to news organizations for hiring local reporters. There's no judgment about quality, for better or worse.
It's just
It's just the only criteria is local. And even that, there's some finessing to figure out what local means. But it's very kind of universal and quantitative standards. There's a bill that Republicans in New Hampshire are pushing, which is very intriguing, which is a tax cut or tax relief for small businesses that advertise in local news. So it'd actually be restaurants and hardware stores that will be deciding, where the money goes. But there's like a kind of market element to it. Or there's another program that's very much like Report for America. There's 3 states now that Washington State, New Mexico, and California have what they call fellowship programs, but it's really very similar to Report for America, where they place journalists in newsrooms for a couple of years. It's administered instead of by Report for America by the journalism program at Washington State University. The Murrow School runs it there. In California, it's run by UC Berkeley's journalism program. But it's placing those reporters in the newsroom, but there's like 3 or 4 layers between the governor and the reporter. Like the money goes to Berkeley, which then has a competitive process, and they pick the newsrooms and the reporters. And so it's not like when you hear government money for the news industry, that can be kind of scary, and we should always have our guard up to not mess that up. But there really are ways of doing this that are safe and can provide public support. And it really does come down to the notion of journalism, local reporting, or journalism as a public good. Like there are some parts of this that are going to be covered by the commercial sector, but there are some that aren't, but which are really important to a healthy democracy. And so it's just like schools or hospitals or libraries, where the community says this is important to a healthy community.
I'm really excited about what you've done and what you're doing. I'm really quite concerned about journalism writ large. I get the sense, and I'm curious about your thoughts because you've been in this world much longer than I have. I get the sense that that the public has become quite disconnected from traditional journalism. That journalism has somehow become some sort of an ivory tower, alienated from the people it's trying to serve. And there are an inordinate number of groups set up to what I'm going to call rescue journalism. But there aren't that many groups that I know of that are trying to fix journalism. And I'm curious about whether journalism needs, from my view, very clearly, journalism needs not only to be supported the way you described, but it also needs to be revamped, reinvented. And I always think about the Democratic groups and the DNC. There doesn't seem to be a direction or an interest in dramatically changing the quality and orientation of the journalism that's produced. So that's my rant. What do you think?
I think there is a lot of thought and effort being put into revamping how the journalism is done. Now, I think if you step back and look at the 7,000 local newspapers and TV stations, you might not see it. If you go to conferences run by philanthropists, that's all they talk about actually is how to revamp or create a much better system. So I think it's those green shoots. There's really a lot of innovation, but it's very small, and it doesn't feel like it's having an impact because it's a minority of what we're experiencing. And I also think that the area where we're the farthest behind is reaching young people.
Right.
Now that's always been true to some degree. They were never the power users of local news, but it's way worse now. And people talk about that a lot. Everyone's quite aware of that as a problem, but I'm not sure I've seen any brilliant solutions.
Well, pull me out of my despondency a little bit and tell me who is out there who is leading the effort to fix journalism as opposed to just rescue it? Because
Oh gosh, there's a lot actually. I mean, there's just randomly what pops into mind. There's a website in Detroit called Outlier that is a super interesting thing because they base their whole thing on text messaging with their readers. And it's for low income. It's still started out for low income families in Detroit who were texting them about the power being out at their apartment building.
right.
And the journalism was very much reacting to things like that were very specific, kind of actionable types of information to help, you know,
And who's
a
taking
reader.
and who's taking that? Sorry to interrupt. And who's taking this promising ideas, these shoots, as you describe them, and saying, "Hey, everybody, we need to be doing one of these 3 to 5 shoot things." Who's taking on the leadership role on what I'm going to call 21st century quality?
That is what. Well, let's see. I'll break this down a couple ways. The foundation world, the big foundations, are trying to figure out how to do that. Now, you'll get a debate, and ask that question to Dick Toffel. He has strong opinions on that, of whether or not it's succeeding or not. But that is what they're trying to do. What Press Forward is trying to do. I think that the hard part, and I think maybe we're at that moment now, is there was about 5 years of just throwing money at all sorts of different experiments, which was appropriate because we didn't know what the hell was going to work, and we really all were reinventing this. We knew we had to do something completely different, and so there's been a lot of experimentation, and it may be hard sometimes for foundations to act like a venture capitalist and say, okay, these 3 are working, those 10 aren't. We're going to put our money over there. The ones that are working. It feels unfair. It feels like you're not, being fair to all different types of communities or players. So it kind of goes against the grain of the way, philanthropically oriented people think. But that is probably the moment we're at now they have to do that. Now, there also are efforts that are bigger efforts, both commercial and nonprofit, that are trying to do that in a, I wouldn't say top down, but a little more of a systemic way. So you have things like American Journalism Project, which is a nonprofit, but it's almost like it's a very complementary program to Report for America, because while Report for America just focuses on reporters, American Journalism Project focuses on business people. Right. It's just helping them hire the right business people and the right development person or advertising and build the proper business models to be sustainable.
Right.
And it's been fairly successful. They've been really able to grow the revenue and grow the capacity to have revenue. Even what I hear from them is that the real limitation on their growth is talent, is having enough business people. There's no shortage of people who want to become journalists, but this is a new field from a business perspective. Being a business leader of a nonprofit local news thing, you're not going to make a lot of money. It's really hard. No one quite knows how to do it. There's no obvious preparation for it. So it's hard to get those people. But that is what American journalism, places like Chalkbeat and, Solutions Journalism,
right.
That's what they're trying to do from a slightly different angle, is really teach newsrooms how to do better by, doing solutions journalism programs.
I've got 2 last questions. Thank you so much for talking. This has been fascinating. Twitter or no Twitter? I'm asking all the journalists, what's your view?
I have largely withdrawn from Twitter.
Okay.
Although I gotta say, the last 2 days when the war started in Iran, I just started checking out Twitter again. I almost never post there. I have a couple of people what I actually use as my main social media platform now? It's going to make me sound like a very old man, but LinkedIn. I feel like LinkedIn has actually kind of turned into a little bit of a social platform. If you post a post there, you get thoughtful comments. And I guess because it's everyone's names and there's a professional network aspect to it. People are on relatively good behavior. You
Uh-huh.
don't have quite as many people just flaming you.
Uh-huh.
It feels like social media like 2008 or something like that.
Okay.
It's not as big, it's stodgier, but it works for me. So that's like I've retreated to LinkedIn as my social platform.
And then what do you think about what I've been calling non-traditional journalists? The people out there who are trying to share accurate information about various topics of interest to them, who just didn't go to J school, and are doing it on a platform that seems scary or unfamiliar to journalists. There are a bunch of them in education, and I think they're fascinating. They're not always able to keep going over a longer period. They're very small operations, sort of micro newsrooms. What do you think about the promise or the peril of non-traditional journalists?
Well, it's, I think as you're saying, there's like a very broad range of quality and sustainability. It's exciting to me because they are uh, reaching people on a much greater scale. They have mostly figured out how to reach people in ways that often the traditional media don't have. So I think it's a great opportunity. Now, obviously, there's questions about standards and journalistic practice and stuff like that, and some of them are not doing that. The other issue is, tell me if this is your experience too, is that most of the examples that I've seen of really good, uh, what did you call them? It's sometimes they're Substacks, sometimes it's podcasts, influencers,
Yeah,
sort of new journal, new content creators.
yeah.
Um, the ones that tend to be sustainable are national. They're doing a topic and their audience is from all over the place. I really have seen not very many
Hmm.
that have made it work on a local level. I assume that's just because of scale. Like it's harder to get, if you're covering education in Tulsa as opposed to education, your audience is much smaller. And
Hmm.
you have to get a very high percentage of the people who care about education in Tulsa to make a
Hmm.
run at it. And maybe it's just not even possible.
Hmm.
So, and this reminds me a little bit of the blog world
Yeah,
around
20 years ago.
2010, 2011 or something like that, where it was so exciting. And like there was these, just like I live in Brooklyn, and every neighborhood, every few blocks had a blog, and they were great because they were really hyper local. It was
Yeah,
just very specific to your area, and they had personality. And then, like 3 years later, they were mostly gone
right.
because they were volunteers. It was not, none of, they all had other jobs, and it's hard work to be the local scribe of your block.
Mhm.
And they burned out or just couldn't do it anymore, and they kind of went away. That's
Yeah,
kind of my fear,
right.
is like we might see that happen, because I'm not sure we've figured out, especially on the local level. It
Mhm.
does seem like there is economics for people to do this if you have a topic that has a very broad audience.
Mhm.
I'm just, and we've tried to actually, even with some of our public policies, try to construct them in a way that these new journalists could plug into them,
Right.
and get a wage subsidy in this essence to make someone's half-time job be a full-time job.
One of the things I'm trying to do with the Educational Writers Association is to encourage them to include these non-traditional parent podcasters or substackers, include them in whatever category or definition they want, so that the community is larger, so that traditional journalists can crib ideas and approaches, and also so that the new journalists can learn some of the practices. We'll see what happens. I was a non-traditional journalist in Chicago covering Chicago public schools. At one point along the way, the Tribune said, "Hey, we like your thing. Can we run it?" And my hope would be for some of the non-traditional folks to find homes locally or nationally, in established institutions with wages and health insurance and all the other things.
And I've heard of that happening. And I was just at a conference, like, and this I think shows, how desperation breaks down walls and makes people. I think 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even, there would have been a lot of snobbery around this. I was just at a conference where this topic came up, and every traditional media person was like tripping over themselves to like, how can we incorporate them, how can we help you, like
Right.
how can we work together? And it was almost like the influencers were like, I don't know if I really want to
Right.
do it. It was sort of
These
the
people are
power
really,
balance had really changed.
but
So I think that experimentation is hopefully going to happen.
and I hope so. I hope it works out well. There are a couple of education journalists who started out as bloggers. There's certainly people we all know their names. Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias did not come from J schools, as far as I understand. They came from the blogging world and then became major parts of traditional journalism, at least for a period of time. I'm hoping some good comes out of that. One last question. What's next for you and Rebuild? Are you launching something new, going on a tour to talk to the world? What's next for you?
We are trying to move into more states. So we started out focused on Congress, and we actually had our employment credit subsidy bill passed the House of Representatives, but then the world changed. And so we've been working in state legislatures, and there's 6 states now that have passed laws that provide revenue. So in 2026, about $75 million will go to local newsrooms as a result of public support in 6 states. So that's actually quite encouraging when you think about it. Just those 6 states, these are relatively small programs, honestly. Those are pilot programs, but it adds up. This is the
Yeah.
thing you kind of realize like, oh, government operates on a different scale. So small programs by government standards are big by, philanthropic standards. So we're just going into more and more states. And our 10-year goal, I keep saying 10 years, and every year I say 10 years, and no one notices that I haven't adjusted it downward, is that, I think a plausible goal is that $1 billion a year should be coming from public support, broadly defined, into local newsrooms. I think it's an achievable goal, but not easy. The other thing I would like to see, in addition to going into more states, is making this really bipartisan. Um, we are a bipartisan, nonpartisan group, and we have some ideas that are starting to get traction in red states and Republican areas, like the one I mentioned, where it's 6 Republican lawmakers in New Hampshire that proposed this small business credit, which I think is very exciting because I think at the end of the day, this can't be a partisan thing. The local, sustaining community news, and if it becomes a partisan thing, it could just make things worse. So that's another goal for the next year, is to kind of try to have some more Republican breakthroughs with our policies.
Excellent. It's been so great talking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Steve
Same
Waldman,
here. Thank you for all you're doing in this area.
thanks a lot.